This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. My guest today, David Silverman, studied creative scriptwriting at Stanford University and then screenwriting and story analysis at USC Cinema. Together with his longtime writing partner, the late Steve Sustarsic, who I knew for more than 40 years, David worked on dozens of TV shows, including Mork Mindy, One Day at a Time, Alf, Newhart, Dilbert, Duckman and South Park. Together, David and Steve also wrote for Tom Arnold, Carey, Wee Herman, Roseanne, and Bob Newhart. David and Steve also did rewrites on features for Steven Spielberg at Amblin, including the Flintstones movie. They created 4 TV shows together, including 2 half-hour comedies, Cleghorne and Secret Service Guy, and the popular long-running animated show The Wild Thornberrys, which spawned 2 animated features, The Wild Thornberrys movie and Rugrats Go Wild. David currently offers script analysis services, and if you're interested, please contact him at hollywoodscriptwriting.com. David's also a licensed psychotherapist. He currently treats industry professionals, especially writers, in private practice in L.A. For more information, please contact David at davidsilvermanlmft.com. It's a particularly great joy for me to have my friend David Silverman, who I've known for more years than either of us should admit, as my guest on StoryBeat today. David, welcome.
Hi, Steve.
It's great to have you on the show. Let's talk about how you got started in this whole crazy business. At what age did you start to write?
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Interestingly, I think I was, writing, I was a cartoonist for my high school newspaper. So I guess I was a junior at that point. Before that, I had my favorite funny radio shows. There was the one called Loman and Barkley here in L.A.
L.A., yeah, it was a local show.
Yeah, and we, my brother and I wrote a joke commercial for them. Like they asked a whole bunch of people to send in, their ideas. So we recorded it. And so they picked us to come down, and I think I was 12 at the time. Come down to the studio and record it.
Wow.
So it was my brother and I. We're just, kids. We don't know anything. And so, we're on the air for the first time. And so between that, the cartooning, I guess I was in some creative writing classes at Stanford, writing short stories. And Scott Trudeau, the guy who wrote, I think that's his name, Presumed Innocent, was my
That's Scott
teacher.
Turow,
right. Yeah, he was my teacher at that time.
Oh, wow.
And, just all that, and then plus I ran into a bunch of funny people at Stanford, and we listened to Fireside Theater and things like that a lot, probably too much.
You do know that Phil Proctor from Fireside has been on this show twice.
Yeah, I heard at least one of those. Yeah, yeah, he's hilarious.
He is amazing, the great Phil Proctor. At what point? So you'd been writing for a while by the time you even got into college, correct?
Yeah, I guess you could say that if you consider the editorial cartoons. I mean, they were funny.
You'd at least had a taste. You at least had a feeling for it.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's right. I also created a comic book.
A comic book?
I had a friend in high school named Bob Wardell, and his nickname was Bunwad. And I wrote a Bunwad comic book.
A Bunwad comic book. Is
Yeah,
is it
he
currently in
didn't like
circulation?
No, it's just something I drew on the back of my homework assignments or something.
And so, okay, so now you went off to Stanford and you were studying, I guess,
Psychology.
script writing,
Yeah,
right?
psychology there. Yeah, that was my major, although I did take a lot of writing courses.
Oh, but your major was psychology.
Right, so that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing today, actually. So my plan was to continue in that field, but like after I met some people at Stanford and I started writing with a guy named Lyle Anderson and some other people there, started writing, I think my first screenplay was written after I graduated.
That's sort of the opposite of the way it works. Most people go into it wanting to be in the business and wind up not succeeding, and then they become psychotherapists. You started as a psychotherapist and fell into the business.
Right, yeah, I was waylaid, much to my parents' dismay.
Even after you were successful?
What's that?
Even after you were successful, were they still dismayed?
Oh, no, they warmed up a little bit. Although, my dad had a double PhD in geology and chemistry.
Oh, boy.
And he started me down this road towards following in his footsteps. And I was like a diligent student in high school. Both Steve and I, my writing partner Steve, and I were both science nerds in high school, oddly enough. And you see that with I've seen that with other writers, TV writers. Al Jean from The Simpsons was a mathematics major at Harvard.
Well, it helps to be super intelligent one way or another.
Yeah, I think there might be something about math.
There might be. There's timing in it. There's timing in comedy.
Become funny for some reason. Not sure why.
Well, I probably not a lot of great mathematicians are known as very funny people, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Einstein isn't known for his, his hilarious.
He was a little witty, but he wasn't known for being a stand-up comic. That's for sure. At what point, as you were going through school, I mean, you started to write professionally not long after USC, correct?
Yeah, that's true. I think it might have been two years or something. Steve again and I were very lucky. We'd written 2 spec scripts, like A Taxi and a Barney Miller, and both of those got us jobs.
And at what point after doing that did you think to yourself, we're pretty good at this, we really should be doing this? Was it right away or did it take a while?
Well, we got into Mork Mindy to pitch. That seemed like we were definitely, that was the #1 show at the time, so I guess we felt pretty good about that. I guess we built our confidence a bit, and then, we wrote on the Jeffersons. Of course, there's always, little self-doubt here and there, especially about the longevity of your career.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty hard to do. You guys were at the top of the game for quite some time, which is not the easiest thing in the world to sustain. Am I correct?
Yes. I guess it's, you really don't know where your career is going to go. All you can do is try your best to get on, the better shows. We didn't always land on the best shows. I think we wrote a Small Wonder episode.
But you worked steadily, with little breaks, but you worked pretty nonstop for at least 20, 25 years. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I would say about 25 years.
Yeah. I think you probably can count very few people in the history of TV who have had that kind of longevity. Most people come and go.
We were very lucky. Very lucky.
Well, I would say your talent had something to do with it. You guys knew how to write funny, and that's one of the more difficult things to do.
Yeah, that's possible. That might be part of it.
It might be part of it. Yeah, indeed. So you have worked on some of the most beloved TV comedies of all time. You worked on Alf for quite some time, and you worked on One Day at a Time for a while, and you worked on Alice for a good length of time too. Yeah.
Yes, they were I did the Jeffersons also.
And the
Like, our
Jeffersons.
second job was the Jeffersons. After Mork Mindy, we sold the story to Mork Mindy, and then we, interestingly though, we sold the story, but we didn't get the script on Mork Mindy. So we were, we thought maybe our career was over.
Well, it's an important lesson for the listeners that just because you don't get the full assignment does not mean that you aren't making success or making inroads.
Right.
That it comes in pieces.
And what's more, the producers, Ed Charlack and Tom Tenowich, the guys we went into pitch to, they were already big fans of ours. And even after we didn't write an episode for Mork and Mindy, they called their friends at the Jeffersons and recommended us to go in and pitch there. So if it wasn't for that, who knows what would have happened.
Well, and that is also a good object lesson for those listening, that one thing in a career leads to another, and that you should always be looking for the potentials beyond what you're doing at the moment. People will like you but not want to hire you for some reason, and that's a good example of it, and then hire you later. So let's talk about sitcom work, because you did that for a very long time. Can you describe on a typical sitcom day? They're long. They are usually around a table. How does it work in sitcoms?
Yeah, well, it varied sometimes. Some of the early shows we worked on, like Alice and One Day at a Time, were run by some of the people. Like, for example, Alice was run by Bob Carroll Jr. and Madeline Davis.
And what did they write?
A lot of stuff. They wrote almost every episode. No, they didn't write every episode of Love Lucy, but they created the show. They actually created the whole setup, the multi-camera setup for filming, half-hour sitcoms. And, so they were at the forefront of the whole, the phenomenon.
Pretty much sitcoms as we knew it, even to today.
Right. And they actually had a little bit more laid-back attitude. Like, for example, we worked with Steve Papoon on many shows, including, I guess, the ones we created, Cleghorne and Secret Service Guy, and Tom Arnold's 2 shows. And he had a strict rule of working from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day.
He worked a 12-hour day. Was it 5 or 6 days a week?
Yeah, it was 5 days a week, and sometimes weekends if it was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So that was rough, because by the time you get to the studio, you've probably gotten up at 7:30 or something, and by the time you get home, it's midnight or 11:30. So you don't have your home life is just kind of like getting to bed and trying to sleep.
Yeah, what home life?
Exactly. So, but in the case of those other shows, One Day at a Time and Alice, Alice, we usually went home around 6 o'clock because these guys were veterans. They had done thousands of shows, and I guess the thrill wasn't that exciting to sit around and do it.
Well, and they had a degree of longevity and confidence.
The confidence also. They felt like they didn't have to panic and, come in on Saturdays at, ungodly hours.
I think they probably also realized it was just a television show and not the most critically important thing in the universe.
Right. Yeah. I think also, in the case of, Bob and Madeline, they'd already worked on maybe the premier TV show of all, sitcom of all time.
Of course.
With Lucy.
I Love Lucy is the seminal show.
Yeah. And that was one little, one perk of knowing those guys was being able to meet Lucille Ball and Eve Arden is his name? The guy who played Colonel Krink?
Yes. Otto Klemper.
Yeah.
I think his father was Victor Klemper.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, he was. So, yeah, we ran into all these stars at some of their parties, and it's just amazing to actually find yourself talking to Lucille Ball, and they had. I remember at the same party they had Lucy, Steve Arden, Colonel Klink, and Steve Allen and Jane Meadows.
Wow.
In one room. It was
Wow.
just a little intimidating. It was just me and Steve, and some of the other writers were very intimidated.
Didn't you eventually work for Lucy?
What's that?
Didn't you and Steve eventually write for a late edition of a Lucy show?
Yes. I forget what it's called, but yeah, it was. She came back like as a grandma. I remember that's the premise of the show. Where she was I think the grandma, and she was raising a family along with her daughter, and yeah, so we wrote for her. Yeah, when she was getting up there, she was still very funny, of course, very physical. She could do all kinds of great things.
What was she, in her 70s or 80s at that point?
Yeah, I think 70s. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
That's amazing. That is amazing. So a typical day, you've done a lot of table writing. What is it like to be around the table all day long? Can you describe it?
Let's see. Yeah, there's rolling in at whatever time they start. Usually it is around 10. There might be, ordering out for lunch, because you're in the room literally, the full time. There's not a lot of leaving, the room to go do this and that. So it was traditional for shows to send out for food and then bring the food back and eat it in the writer's room. And so, you could leave for bathroom breaks and stuff, but basically the point was that you're all in a room together, and there's a head writer who's kind of guiding things so it doesn't turn to chaos. But
is most of the room writing about rewriting, or is most of it about breaking story?
I would say both, actually. Yeah, it seemed like the advantage of having a room is that you have a lot of minds that can contribute, and a lot of writers can. So when it comes to shaping a story, it's great to have the whole staff involved. And so, because, one or two people can think of a lot of ways to go with the story, but you have 10, 14 people in the room, you can get a lot more ideas.
How often does it become muddied because of that many people?
Well, there is that, depending on, it's really about the showrunner's ability to control the room. Sometimes the room can get away from you. There's people who, the idea is, the rules of the room are that you don't fight for something you pitched. You pitch it and you let the showrunner decide if it's good or bad, or if he wants it in the outline or the story. And some people, I've been on staffs where some people would dig in and argue about the pitch if it was denied, if the showrunner didn't like it. So that gets very muddy.
And I would assume that there are some episodes, if not quite a few, that start off being great for one reason or another, and the room actually screws them up.
That happens. Yeah, that does happen. Usually, though, we get a few chances to fix it. Like, as a table read,
mm-hmm.
the first day.
Describe table read. Describe table read for those who don't know.
Right. So the table read takes place usually the morning of Monday. Most shows, they have a schedule. They start the table read on Monday, and they film in front of a live audience, or they film a single camera on Friday.
So table read is with the stars of the show.
Right. Yeah, all the stars are present. entire staff is there. We're there to take notes and see how the reading goes. So, yeah, we want to hear it. We want to, it's everybody's seated, so they're not acting it out. But we want to hear how the jokes play and how the story tracks. And after the table read, there's a big meeting that usually lasts the rest of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and where we do, we punch up jokes that weren't that strong, or we correct story issues. Sometimes we get a note from one of the actors, like the bigger, the stars. If at the table read, if they have issues, you really have to pay attention to
Mm-hmm.
them, because they're, yeah, it's funny that the writer's show is the writers until production, and then one person's more powerful than the writers, and that's the star.
And it's not the director who's more powerful; it's the star.
Right. Yeah, it's different from movies. I would say that. Even in movies, the stars can carry a lot of weight if they're a really big star.
Of course.
And they can have acts for rewrites and things like that.
So you've also been an executive producer. You've produced shows, and writing shows. Lots of shows like you have comes with various built-in pressures. How do you deal with that pressure? Do you and Steve have any particular technique for dealing with pressure? Do you have any tricks?
Let's see. It's good to have a sense of humor.
Especially on a comedy.
Especially on a comedy. But even about all the things that go wrong and the craziness, it's good to it's good to be able to make light of them. And so when things do go wrong, and they always go wrong, so usually that was Steve. That's what Steve and I would do, is just joke about it.
Well, you and I both know very well that Steve didn't take too much seriously, and he would make jokes of pretty much everything.
Yeah, to the point where they were inappropriate.
Steve, nobody created more inappropriate jokes than Steve Sustarsic. At least not in my experience.
Yeah. So this guy was a contrarian, I think that's a little bit why, his style of writing, there's an element of surprise and good humor. And, he would look at a very different point of view. I guess it wasn't as funny as maybe like a lot of people would think. But, the idea of during the OJ trial, when you're on staff, you do end up sitting around talking about current events.
Sure, of course.
So he was convinced, he went to USC, and OJ was a big, hero of his, and he was convinced that OJ was innocent. And during the entire trial, and I don't think even until later in life, I think he was still proclaiming OJ's innocence. But so he would look at a different point of view, and that's why I think a lot of his humor was like surprising and effective.
Oh, he definitely had a skewed point of view, and I think you'll agree that having a skewed point of view in the comedy writing world is a big advantage.
Yeah, and also it's an original voice. You're not hearing what that's what you want is to have not be thinking of the same jokes that everybody else gets that pops into their head immediately. Mm-hmm. You're looking for the jokes that that's why there's a lot of pitching goes on in comedy writing rooms. So so the first joke that everybody comes up with is not the one that goes in the script. You're looking for a little more interesting, a little more original.
A little more off the beaten path.
Right.
So obviously you and Steve were collaborators for what? Essentially 40 years, yeah?
Yeah, easily, yeah.
And so, all right, so let's talk about that, because I think that's a very important and interesting topic to cover, and that's the act of collaboration. Obviously, most TV comedy is written by teams. There's not a whole lot of solo acts. Many people are teams, and so when you collaborate, what makes a good collaboration work? At least for you.
Yeah, well, it really helps if you get along with the other person and have a lot in common. And because I do know, like as a therapist now, I work with writers who, they do not get along with their writing partners.
And
at all.
what do you do with them? Don't be specific on individuals, but how do you work with them? What do you do?
Well, one of the things in that situation where it's a relationship problem, you talk about the best way to approach those things. A lot of times, like a marriage, for example, a lot of times there's issues in a relationship that can't be like resolved one way or the other. Like there's no open and shut answer. Steve was a conservative Republican. I'm a liberal Democrat. We were never going to change that. So you have to be able to manage it, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, and that might have broken up a lot of other, partnerships. I would imagine. And I'm sure it does break up a lot of marriages.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it breaks up partnerships all the time. People start working and realize they're not right for each other, even if the ultimate product is good. It's hard. It is very much like a marriage, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So
and we, had to, get used to each other's peccadillos. Steve had his, I had mine. A lot of comedy writers have a little, a pretty good cross section of them. I would say are neurotic in one way or another.
When you say Steve had his peccadillos, Steve had peccadillos that had peccadillos.
Right. Yeah.
He was a unique person.
Quirky guy. He had really long hair. He wore Grateful Dead T-shirts to the office.
He ate a very specific way. He had only certain kinds of foods he would eat, and he was a unique character. He was a unique character in my life, as I know he was in yours.
He was. He had a little touch of OCD too.
Oh, he had a lot of OCD. I think that may have been part of his charm.
Yeah. One odd thing that I noticed it being in the same office with him for 20 years. Every time he hung up the phone that I could see, he hung up 7 times.
Wow. Really? 7 times? He'd pick it up and hang it up 7 times?
Yes.
My goodness. I believe he also had the same habits with turning on and off lights at home.
Right.
He'd turn off lights a certain number of times.
Yeah. There's a quality I think most comedy writers have a bit of an obsessive way of thinking. Comedies, everybody's always looking for the laugh, for the joke, and for the better joke. So there's a little bit of a perfectionism thing that goes into writing. Writing is a lot about getting the words in the right order, whether it's a rule of 2 or what have you, or just, looking for the funnier words in the sentence. Writers tend to be obsessive about finding the best.
Would you say that having that obsessive quality is a positive in that business?
I think it is. I think you have to be, to be a perfectionist, you have to be willing to go over and over and over the material. In a typical week, we probably punched up the same joke, maybe sometimes 3 or 4 times, and by that I mean we spent maybe an hour pitching on that one line of dialogue, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be willing to. There's a certain obsessive nature that enables people to work that hard and to not give up.
What would you say would be the disadvantages of collaborating? Are there any?
Let's see. Well, you split the check down the middle.
That's bad.
So so that's a disadvantage.
When you say the check, you mean the payment to you. You don't split the check in the restaurant, although you can do that too. But it's when you get paid, you're splitting the single fee.
The paycheck, right?
Right.
So a writer who writes by himself is making twice as much money as the partnership. So, so there's that. That's a big disadvantage. The advantages, though, I mean, when you're coming up with story ideas and pitching jokes, there's two people to bounce ideas off of. And just when it comes to running a career in Hollywood, where the stress levels and the deadlines are insane, and some of the people are insane, some of the bosses are insane. It's nice to have a friend there. And when you get rejected, which happens a lot, as you know, in screenwriting and TV writing,
indeed, you
can commiserate with your partner. And whereas sometimes enough rejections would cause somebody to lose heart and maybe leave the business, we were always there to bolster each other's, mood and to keep things going.
Well, that's a huge advantage. So you brought up executives. I am curious. I know you've had more than your fair share of dealings with executives at studios and networks, and you got whatever kind of wacky notes that you got that were wrong or unhelpful, or perhaps even damaging to the story. What did you do to deal with executives and their particular quirks?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Yeah, we had some difficult executive producers. So there's two different kinds of, there's studio executives, there's network executives, and their jobs are to try and impose their notes and their will onto the screenplay that the writers are writing. And so their validation comes from having writers who take their notes. So they're, and I think their careers are, determined in a certain amount to the extent that they can get more notes in, and so they can feel that they're, that they've made a difference.
Well, if they don't give out notes, they're not doing any work at all.
Exactly. Right.
So that's the only way to justify their job.
Trick to dealing with notes, when they're given, you pay, complete attention. You agree that's a very important note. You make them feel like they've been heard, and you take all the notes. You don't leave anything out. Sometimes if a note is particularly terrible, you might want to try to come up with an alternative on the spot, so you don't go home and have to try to make that stupid note work.
Mm-hmm. And would you say you and Steve were pretty good at resolving issues that way?
Yeah, we were actually. We were pretty good at coming up with ideas quickly and in a way that wasn't, too confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you have to treat these people. These are, these people are going to determine your career. You don't want to get in bad with any network suits or studio suits. So, you have to be, and I think Steve and I were very diplomatic, and were able to get.
Well, I've known you for a long time, David, and I of course knew Steve as long or maybe a little longer. And I don't know either one of you. Neither of you impressed me as someone who would, belittle someone or badmouth someone or yell or scream. That's just not your nature.
No, we're very unthreatening. We're non-threatening. Both of us, yeah, we were. And I think, that probably has a lot to do with longevity.
I think it does. You didn't get a bad reputation as being jerks to work with.
Right. And that does happen a lot.
No doubt.
Especially in comedy writing, yeah.
Because there's a lot of ego involved, and people who are very egotistical, they just sort of fly off the handle sometimes.
Right. Yeah, those are the people, you don't necessarily want in the room. The people who are going to, be drama queens and, eat up. I mean, you're in a room with people and you want to get home as soon as possible, and sometimes people will argue for an hour over some line that's not that important.
I'm sure that makes nobody happy, not even them.
Yeah, it's true. It's Yeah, you have to get used to being at work very late if you want to be a comedy writer.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, because there's too many things that could happen to push back the time you get to leave.
Right. So you're beyond sitcoms. We've already talked about. You're also well known for having worked in not just TV comedy, but for animation as well. Obviously, you worked on Shaolin Showdown and Duckman and Dilbert, and also you creating the Wild Thornberrys. What would you say are the major differences between writing for a typical TV sitcom and something that is comedic but animated?
Animation is a more visual medium. You have to, especially in daytime animation shows like Winnie the Pooh and I guess Shaolin Showdown, you're looking for visual jokes. So, you're playing, a lot of times you're playing to an audience of kids, and the kind of humor they laugh at is a little bit different from like a primetime sitcom. Of course, some of the shows we worked on were primetime animation.
Mm-hmm.
Were
the primetimes more like a typical primetime sitcom in terms of what you could do?
Right, it's more character humor and things like that,
mm-hmm.
more attitudes. Whereas, Saturday morning, it's you want more visual gags and less subtlety, more big gags.
Did you enjoy writing one style over the other? Did you enjoy the visual more than the verbal, or was the verbal more your thing?
Yeah, I was always more verbally, I think, attuned. I know, Steve was really great at visual gags.
Oh, very.
Yeah, he was really great at that, and he was very fast, which is a big deal.
Hugely fast. He was as prolific a writer as any writer I've ever known.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
That may have been part of the OCD. That may have been part of it.
Yeah, he was driven.
He was definitely driven. Would you say that when you're writing for an animated piece, that you're having to think about the way that the lines are delivered more so than in live action, because there is no actual live action person standing there?
That's true. Yeah, you don't get like a run through or rehearsal with actors, but there's voice actors, but you don't see them until the last day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little, you have to use your imagination more. I mean, with one nice thing about animation is you don't have to follow all the rules of logic. You can, people can have superpowers, and they can be funny or they can be mind blowing. So you can do a lot more in animation, just in terms of using your imagination. And
you can squash and stretch the characters and not hurt them.
Right. Yeah. That was a huge advantage. Sometimes you can create a little world where a lot of odd things can happen, and and some scenes that were structured that way, you could almost anything you said could be funny. If the attitudes were set up right.
Sure, absolutely. A lot of it has to do, of course, with the people that actually wind up drawing the cartoons, and sometimes their work doesn't help you, and sometimes it does.
Yeah, sometimes you have to give notes to the artists or the art directors and things. I have to say the artists we dealt with were amazing artists.
Especially at Warner Brothers. Klasky
right.
Chupo.
Those guys had their own style. You've seen their work on Little Monsters, Rugrats, the Wild Thornberrys, The Simpsons. They created a very kind of interesting look. It was not a whole lot like Disney or Warner Brothers.
No, it was very unique. It was its own look. Yeah, I mean, you could tell a Klasky Chupo show as soon as you saw it. You didn't even know they worked on it.
Yeah, those guys were great to work with.
What made them great? What made them great, David?
Well, they had great ideas, which you don't always see. And these are people who own this company. They're not, they're not story people, but they actually had lots of creative ideas. They were funny. They were a married couple. Gabor was married to Arlene, and they were very nice to us. At one point, they asked us to pitch on a property they own called Politeness Man. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No, don't know Politeness Man.
Politeness Man was a National Lampoon. It was a comic. At the end of the Lampoon, they would have comics and that sort of thing. And he was a superhero, but he couldn't resist correcting people's grammar and telling them how to dress and things like that. Very funny.
That sounds like that would be right up yours and Steve's alley.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to break that story, and then we got to work with the artists at Klosky Chupo. We would describe a scene, and they would draw it for us. And when we came to pitch the movie to Nickelodeon, the pictures they drew were so great that the people at Nickelodeon fell in love with the idea.
Do you believe in research? Do you do a lot of research on your work?
Yeah, when it's required. On sitcoms, you're kind of moving so fast that you don't have a lot of time. But when it comes to feature films, I think it's more definitely as important.
You get a little more luxury to do that research.
Yeah. What's your experience with do you spend a lot of time researching?
Yeah, same thing. It depends upon what kind of project you're on. Yes, I do a lot of research if it's a longer project, if it's a play, or if it's a feature. But if I'm writing a animation piece or something like that, I definitely, hopefully the research is studying the show itself and studying the Bible and so on. And I'm talking about the show Bible, and knowing it. That becomes the research, so that you're very in tune with the characters. Otherwise, you're in trouble.
I know it was a good idea to screen every episode of a TV show before you went to pitch.
If the show existed before you got to it. I mean, I worked on lots of shows where the show didn't exist, so you were making it up.
Right, yeah, but it's an advantage, I guess. You can see the style that they are.
Totally.
I know a friend of mine, Bob Bennetson, was hired on The Simpsons, and it was late into the run, and he watched every single Simpsons episode, A, to know what their style was like, and then B, to know what the stories were so he wouldn't duplicate them.
Right. Yeah.
That was hundreds of episodes.
Well, that all by itself is an obsession, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be able to do that.
Right, yeah. He's a very successful writer, Bob is.
Very.
He did
Home Improvement.
Coach, Home Improvement. He had a piece of Home Improvement, like a point.
Wow.
He made a lot of money from that show.
I bet he did.
But he was mercilessly, he was driven. And I know his writing partner, Howard Bennetson, who I wrote with on a couple occasions, it was hard to keep up with Bob. I know. And then Howard ended up retiring at the age of 45. Because he just didn't like that, the intensity of. Bob kept going and running shows. He's pretty amazing.
Well, he's
still pitching movie ideas today.
He was not only good at it, but as you say, he was intense and fast.
Yeah. And we worked with those guys on the Jeffersons, on Alice, on Newhart, on Alf, and Howard and I wrote a show called Space Cats.
Space Cats.
Yeah, Paul Fusco. When we were on the Alf show, Paul Fusco, the guy who does the voice of Alf and runs the puppet, and who created the show with Tom Patchett, asked Howard and I to write a pilot for an animated show called Space Cats, and he was creating puppets for that too. And they were, cats from outer space. It was a very funny idea, and Howard and I ended up writing that together. I remember Paul was supposed to write it with us. There were going to be, there were 3 names on the pilot that Howard and I wrote, and we were all going to write it together. And then when it came time, like the day of the, Howard and I got together to start writing the pilot, he called us into his office and said that he had to go on a cruise with his wife to save his marriage, and that he would be back just around the same time that the pilot was due.
What
So
good
Howard
timing?
Yeah, so Howard and I ended up writing the whole thing, but it was fun. The show lasted 13 episodes. It was fun. That's the thing about TV, is you just don't know if you're going to be around for a while.
Well, that's it. You're obviously working at whatever's coming your way, unless you have the power to pick and choose, which is not all that frequent. You take jobs sometimes just because you need to keep taking the jobs.
Oh yeah. In Hollywood, there's like a saying, "What have you done lately?" So you don't want to go a year or 2 years without working on a show.
So what would you say are the most important things that a writer must do when developing a story and then a script? What for you? What is the development of a story and a script like for you? What is important?
Well, let's see. Well, the story, since my experience is mostly in comedy, you want the story to have a lot of funny elements.
Sure.
So you're not just writing. So it's always easier when, like, the premise of the scene is funny, to write funny dialogue, and much harder when the scene is a straight scene and you're trying to make all the dialogue funny.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes like in Seinfeld's a good example of that. That show, like, the scenes will be funny, and the lines wouldn't necessarily have to be big jokes, but they'd be hysterical in context. So looking for a funny bend on the story. So, for example, Steve and I wrote a feature called Purple Haze, which was about 2 college kids who never, they're kind of slackers, they party all the time, and their whole mission in life is that they never want to leave school to actually have to work a job. So they keep adding majors to their, they end up with 3 or 4 degrees, and they just try to, their parents are paying their tuition, and they're, the main goal is, so that's a funny premise.
Mm-hmm. I've read it. It's a funny script.
Yeah, there's another funny storyline in there where, these guys were kind of mad and out there, so they needed to raise some money for a big party or something. So one of them comes up with this insane idea of we're taking his friend's girlfriend on a trip to Santa Barbara, and then asking her parents for ransom money. So she doesn't know that she's being kidnapped. And it was just a crazy setup. So when the premises are funny along the line, it helps. So the dialogue ends up to be funnier.
So you would say premise development is probably the biggest help that you can come up with, is a great premise for a scene or a whole story.
Right. Yeah. Stories, and you want your the hero of the story to be pushing the action. Of course, you don't want the action to be pushing. You don't want it to be the other way around. A lot of writers, like I read a lot of scripts as a script consultant, and a lot of newbie writers will they won't have their protagonist pushing the story forward. They'll be just they might, and a lot of people will do multi-characters, and they won't have like a strong motivation for any of them, and that sort of thing. So you want the strongest powerful motivation for your protagonist, and you want an antagonist that is equal or surpasses them in power. So, the stronger the antagonist, the stronger the story.
Well, you want your antagonist equal to or greater than, that's for sure. Better if they're greater than.
Right.
So then you've got all that conflict that you can dig into.
Right. Yeah. So like in The Verdict, you want Paul Newman, who's a lawyer, going up against a multinational corporation that has more resources than you could ever have. And, or you want Luke Skywalker to go up against the Death Star and Darth Vader, and so bigger, like the more powerful the antagonist, the better the story. So you're looking at all those elements.
Well, I like your notion from a moment ago about characters that are proactive versus reactive. You want your protagonist to be proactive and taking charge.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many newbie writers fall into the trap.
Actually, by virtue of my teaching for the last 8 years, I'm fully aware.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine.
We see a lot. We see a lot of what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So I want to before we get toward the end of the show here, I want to talk for a moment about you and your therapy business that you've started to grow here for a while. I assume that you have clients who find themselves, I guess the best word would be blocked or unable to write for one reason or another. Do you have any techniques that you use to help clients break blocks?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem for writers in general and newbie writers is being able to sit down and write every day. A lot of writers are, going into it, they think that they're going to be inspired every morning, and that they're going to have these great ideas and want to start writing, but it doesn't work that way at all. That Woody Allen said success is 80% showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to put your butt in a seat in front of a typewriter or a computer, and
that's the formula for success.
Yeah, and people who have more of a routine about getting up at 9 and writing 3 pages a day. All those things are important, and too many people have this feeling that they're going to be inspired and sit down in the middle of the night and write. But it's more of it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
It is a marathon, not a sprint. That's a very wise way to say that. Do you have any particular advice on pitching? That you have a technique for pitching?
Yeah, we tried all sorts of different approaches. One, we tried memorizing a pitch, and that didn't work very well for Steve and I. We were better at just going over it, being very well prepared, and then just going in and just talking to the other, like the executives, as if they were a friend, or just trying to explain the story. Different people, some people are better at memorizing things and acting them out in front of a room full of studio execs. But Steve and I are both more or less introverts. We were not soft-spoken. We're soft-spoken people. We're not kind of people that can get up in front of a huge group of, which is studio execs are not a great audience anyway. But,
no.
But yeah, so that wasn't our style. So I think the style we liked best was to be prepared, go in and explain it as if you were trying to explain your story to a friend.
I think that's a very interesting approach, that you weren't so much winging it, you were prepared, but you weren't memorized. Right,
yeah. So, and Steve and I had the advantage of being able to come up with funny lines quickly, especially, so like he would be pitching something and I would chime in with a joke, or vice versa. So that would keep the mood. When you're pitching comedy, it's really important to be getting laughs in the room.
Yeah, I would think so.
Which is sometimes difficult. Sometimes you're going in at 7 a.m. or something, and nobody's just still nursing their coffee, and they're not in the mood to laugh. And we've been there.
And they may well be hungover on top of it.
Yeah. So we've been there, and but we were always pretty good about breaking the ice, being personable. I mean, there's always chit chat that goes on before you launch into your story.
Of course.
And so, again, we're non-threatening people. People feel at ease around it.
I think that, the more you've said that now twice, and I think that may be actually the secret to how you guys stuck around for so long, is that nobody felt threatened by you.
Yeah.
Well, and you did good work. That's part of it.
Yeah.
Because if you were non-threatening but your work sucked, you still wouldn't have been around.
Yeah, if work sucks. Yeah, nothing happens at all. You don't work. So,
no, yeah. Well, David, you've given us so much interesting advice here and so much great information, and so we're gonna wind this up, and I'll give you the last two questions. I know that you've met and worked with lots of very interesting and unusual people in the industry, and you've had lots of experiences. Can you share with us an oddball or a weird or quirky or just a flat-out funny story that happened to you or you and Steve along the way?
Let's see. Steve and I were involved in the writing of the Flintstones movie.
Yes.
Back in 1990. And that was a very interesting experience. We knew the director, Brian Levant. We'd worked with him on some TV shows as an executive producer. And so the process was really interesting. We went in with some other writers, and we read a whole bunch of existing scripts that Amblin had.
Mm-hmm.
And some were written. One was written by Gary Ross. I remember the guy wrote Dave, and Reno Osborne wrote another one. They wrote Moonlighting. And we read them all, there must have been 6 of them. And then we got together and came up with what would we want to write? What do we want to combine some of the stories? Do we have fresh ideas? So that was interesting, and we came up with an idea. We pitched it to Steven Spielberg, which was really fun, and he gave us the green light. So it was a long process. There were lots of people in the room. It was written similarly to a sitcom. There was a writing staff, and Brian was running the room. And so
you wrote it around a table.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it was one of the only movies I know that have been written that way.
Mm.
So we ended up during the filming, it was fun because Elizabeth Taylor was in the cast, and John Goodman and Rick Moranis,
mm-hmm.
also Rosie O'Donnell. We were called to the set, to the Bedrock set, Steve and I, because Rick Moranis, who was playing Barney, had some notes on. He didn't think Barney would say this, and he didn't like the jokes and that sort of thing. So we showed up, and I guess it was in Aqua Dulce in the desert where they were trying to set up Bedrock. And we showed up, and there's Rick in a leopard skin outfit.
Barney Rubble.
Barney Rubble, and we were walking around the set, and there's all these buildings built out of big old rocks and things. And Kyle McLaughlin was on the set playing their boss, but he was also in a leopard skin outfit, and it was a little surreal. And at one point, Steve and I were taking copious notes about Rick Moranis wanted us to change, and we looked down, and his feet, he had 6 toes on both of his feet, and they were webbed, And Steve and I are kind of looking at each other like, oh, okay. I mean,
are you talking about his real feet or phony feet?
No, his real feet.
Oh my goodness!
And then he told us, "Oh yeah, I have a prosthetic that they made for me which only has 5 toes." So when I somehow got through the rest of the meeting, trying to keep a straight face.
His real feet had 6 toes on each foot, and they were webbed?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Did he come up out of the ocean somewhere?
Yeah, that's possible.
Wow, very
No, he
interesting.
came from Canada. I'm
He
pretty
came
sure.
from-
But
Same thing.
But it was one of the stranger things, and I don't know. You can picture Steve reacting to this. He
Oh.
had a hard containing himself.
I bet he talked. It's interesting. He never said that to me, and he used to tell me all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But that he kept to himself. He must have had a field day with that.
Oh yeah. We, like I say, it was hard to get through there, but we ended up, we went off and we addressed every note, and he was happy, and then the show went on. So yeah. That was one of the odder things that happened to us.
And you actually pitched it to Spielberg, right?
Oh, the movie?
Yes.
You mean the ideas? Yeah. We wrote them up and we gave them to Brian, and then Brian took them to Spielberg. So.
Nice. All right. So, in your experience, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are just trying to get into the business? You've already given us plenty of tips, but one particular one that you might have for those trying to break in, or those who are somewhere in the door but are trying to get to the next level.
One thing I try to tell the people that I'm doing therapy with writers all the time, and the rejection is really hard to handle. So one thing I try to tell writers is to look at again, it's like that metaphor of writing. A career in writing is a marathon, not a sprint. And when it comes to handling rejection, most times you're going to get, if you write a spec script, 98% of the time, if it's a screenplay, it's not going to be bought as is. And most writers, I think, would. I think they're convinced that their script is going to sell, or something. But what they're not thinking is that your first spec script is a sample, and it can be used, even though it won't be bought and filmed. It can get you meetings. It can get you a meeting with a producer who might want to hear other ideas you have, or a producer that wants to sign you a script to write. And it can get you a meeting with a manager or an agent, and and also actually managers. I think managers are more likely to be looking at newbie scripts. Just throw that out. I don't know if you ever heard the term that agents just like to field offers.
I had not heard that term. They just like to field offers.
Right. So they're not growing your career as much. I mean, a manager will sit down with a newbie writer and help them with the scripts, whereas agents won't really do that. So, they're looking for working writers, so they can just get offers, so they can field the offers that come in.
They just want they want the money. They don't want to do the work.
Yeah, and they do their job. They create, they get you the best prices, and they get you really good contracts and things. But managers are the people who will grow your career. So I'm always telling young writers it's easier to find a manager, and also the manager's going to be better for you in the beginning.
But I like the advice and the notion that don't write it with the expectation of selling it, though that may happen rarely. But write it with the hope that it will get you to a different place.
Right, and that's a positive outcome. Getting the meeting with a producer or director or a studio exec.
Hugely positive.
Most people aren't thinking that way. They're just going to think, I'm going to write this, it's going to get shot. And the other big thing I like to tell writers is to think about that they're going to commit themselves to a lifetime of writing. Because when you're just writing that script and hope you sell it, or writing that script and hope you get a job, usually I would say the average for most writers before they're successful, they write probably 5 or 6 screenplays. Or I remember our friend Steve Poon wrote 60 specs.
60 specs
before he ever got hired.
Wow.
So you got to think long term. That way, each individual rejection doesn't hurt as much. You have to be able to accept that you might go 6 months to a year with a dry spell. Like I say, how long did it take Steve to write 60 specs? It's long. It could have been years. So.
Years. He didn't write 60 specs in 6 months. That'd be 10 specs a month. That'd be too much. So yeah, years.
Yeah. So look at the long term. Try not to get too, focused on everybody you send it to. It's a numbers game. You need to get it. You may get 100 no's, but all it takes is one yes.
That is very wise, because really all you're looking for is one champion, not 100.
Right, and that's all it takes.
David, this has been really fantastic. I'm so glad that you did the show and gave us all this great information and understanding of how the business works, and especially in the comedy business.
It was fun. Thanks.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.